State Attorney General Matt Platkin is racking up some victories against the Trump administration, at least for now. A federal judge on Monday temporarily halted an effort by the White House to slash federal funding for medical and public health research through the National Institutes of Health, after Platkin and more than 20 other state attorneys general sued. Another judge yesterday said the administration had defied his order by continuing to withhold federal funding. Courts have also temporarily blocked Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency from accessing potentially confidential Treasury information after a suit from Platkin and 19 other state AGs. And a Trump executive order to limit birthright citizenship, challenged by New Jersey and others, has also been put on hold. Meanwhile, Democrats in Congress fighting the Trump administration are facing a tough reality, with fewer tools at their disposal to challenge his efforts to overhaul the federal government. Now, some Democrats are considering taking drastic actions. Joining me now is New Jersey Senator Andy Kim to explain. Well, thank you for joining us, Senator.
Thanks for having me.
Well, the State Attorney General here, Matt Platkin, has been leading efforts to challenge President Trump's orders in court. But what, if anything, can you and your Democratic colleagues do in Washington?
Well, first of all, I'm glad to see the Attorney General Platkin moving forward. He and I have been in touch about how to be able to approach this ever since November. In fact, we had him and a number of states' attorney generals down to the U.S. Capitol to engage with a number of senators to talk through that broader strategy. So I always tell people, like, you got to look at all the range of tools that we have right now, and working very closely with him on the litigation side, for our end, making sure that we're pushing forward on legislation as well as the oversight and communication aspects of that. A lot that we're pushing back on when it comes to these nominations for the Trump administration. I was speaking on the floor of the Senate in the middle of the night, raising concerns on a effort to be able to push on one of the worst of the nominees, Russell Vogt. Raising up that profile. Those are the actions that we need to make sure we're doing. And then just yesterday, I did a telephone town hall, had well over 1,000 people on that, making sure we're explaining what's happening, the threat and the concern to the communities, and bringing together roundtables of organizations across New Jersey to be able to really press that home. So those are the actions that we need to be continuing and growing.
Yeah, you are continuing those actions, Senator. You said this weekend at NBC that you're open to shutting down the government to try and stop White House's efforts to dismantle federal agencies. How?
Yeah, well, look, I want to sort of set the record straight here, because it's the Republicans that have the White House, the majority in the House, as well as the Senate. They could very well push forward without Democrats. And so, we've seen that in terms of how they've been moving forward with some of these nominees, the worst of them, as we've seen get through, like Pete Hegseth. So our effort here is to try to engage and say, hey, look, the Republicans, they own this process. That I don't want to see a shutdown. I was a government employee, a career public servant. I worked through multiple shutdowns. It's not at all what the American people want. And what we're seeing right now is Trump's effort to basically already shut down the government. In fact, not even just shutting it down, but trying to dismantle large parts of it. So I just really hope that the American people understand and see what is happening on that front. And when it comes to the government funding process going forward, I just talked with my colleagues. We're waiting to see if the Republicans are going to seek efforts to be able to negotiate in a bipartisan way. But if we're not seeing them engage in that capacity and not showing us the assurances that this is going to move forward in a way that will go away from the lawlessness that we've seen so far from the Trump administration, that's when we have to engage in a different tack.
Is that the only effective way you think congressional Democrats can push back?
No, no. I mean, like I said, there's lots of other ways in which we're trying to maneuver. I was pointing out that one because, that is something that is coming up just in a matter of weeks, and there are other steps as well that we can try to push on. Right now on the Senate side, right, the confirmation hearings are front and center. And that's one of our best ways to really try to hit home and tell the American people what is happening. On top of that, I mean, look, as someone who was my very first job in government was at USAID, the Agency for International Development, which the Trump administration has been trying to dismantle over the course of the last week. The efforts that I took to go to the USAID building, to draw attention to this, to speak out not only to the press, but be able to engage. And actually, just tomorrow, I'll be meeting with a number of former USAID officials to highlight this publicly. But I'm also engaged directly with current USAID officials, and that helps me get a sense of what's happening behind the scenes. And we can use that for litigation as well as legislation and some of the oversight capabilities. So those are the types of tools that we're bringing together.
Do you think Republicans would be willing to negotiate?
We'll see. I mean, this is something where they have needed Democratic votes for every other continuing resolution or budget process over the last 2 years. They have only really, one, I think, one vote to spare on the House of Representatives side right now. And they have a number of people on that side that are very defiant. They were trying to stand in the way of Speaker Johnson becoming the speaker again. So they have a very hard time navigating on their own. They've never been able to do that before with just their own votes. So this sense of if they need to have Democratic votes, the question then is, what are they going to bring to the table? What assurances can they bring?
You've mentioned that you've been holding roundtables and town halls this week to hear about how these federal orders are actually affecting people. What are you hearing?
Yeah, right now what I'm hearing is, so first of all, the effects on federal employees is not just down in Washington, D.C. We have a lot of federal employees in New Jersey
Right.
that are worried about that. And then also the funding freeze that the Trump administration tried to undertake, it would affect huge swaths of community organizations and leaders. I had this one leader on a town hall last night that works on disability issues, trying to help New Jerseyans that have disabilities, and she was saying that these organizations and centers around New Jersey, they only have enough funding for maybe about a couple weeks, really, and 50, 60 days at most. So, any type of funding freeze that could be 3, 4, or 5 months or longer would be absolutely catastrophic. And these are for centers with people with disabilities, physical disabilities and challenges that need the care. They cannot be put on pause.
Well, Senator, do you think we have reached a constitutional crisis?
I think we're just about there. I mean, I think what we're seeing is certainly breaking of the law, and now we have these, judicial efforts that are underway. And I think what worries me most is that, we saw the vice president, publicly say online that he thinks that these judges are going too far, and that there are questions about whether or not they need to be listened to. Like, that's when we are getting into the constitutional crisis, is when if we see the defiance of the executive branch not engaging in an order from a co-equal branch of government, the judiciary, which has been how we've been able to settle these disputes in the past. Right now, we have in a legislature, as I said, led by a Republican Senate, a Republican House, that are they're just totally fine, just abdicating their responsibility and their power. We see that with the nominations. They say, oh, we just need to vote on everyone that Trump puts forward. Then why do we have the constitutional right to be able to advise and consent to start with? Why are we just handing that over?
Well, thank you, Senator Kim, for joining us.
Thanks for having me again.